Hey, Mark Hamrock here with Hamrock Music. In this video, we're going to be looking at the template I created for Reaper and how to get it set up and how to use it. Please like and comment below and subscribe. So we'll get started with downloading the necessary files. In the link to the folder I sent you, you'll see there's 3 files there. A couple of them are zip files. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to download all 3 of these. So if I right click on the first one there, download, don't worry about that. And then you'll see it downloading there. And once that's downloaded, then we can download the template file itself. That'll be pretty quick because that's a small file. And then we'll do the MIDI drum grooves file. So right click, download. And once all 3 of those files are downloaded, we can go to our File Explorer and then go to Downloads here. You'll see all 3 of them. So I'm going to drag them to my desktop and we'll close that. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is we're going to want to open this file. Now it might look a little bit different if you don't have WinRAR, which is a program I use for unzipping files, but it works the same. So I would just open that folder and then you'll see the Hamrock Music Drum Kit folder within that. So then we're going to want to go back to File Explorer and then we're going to want to drag that on the local disk, the C drive. So I'm going to take that folder, drag that over there, unzip it, and there you go. So we can go ahead and close that, close this. And then the next thing we'll do is the MIDI drum grooves, open that up, and then we're going to want to drag this. What I would do is just drag it onto your desktop, and that way you have it handy because we're going to be dragging some of the files within this into Reaper. So if I just drag that onto my desktop, and that'll unzip. And there we go. So I can close that. And then the template we have here, we can just open that directly. Go ahead and double click on that and that'll open Reaper. And there you go. All right, so this is what the template looks like. As you can see, it has quite a few tracks within it and everything's color coded, which is pretty cool. So all the green tracks have to do with the drums. The blue tracks are the bass. We have a couple acoustic guitar tracks here, and then electric guitar tracks are in red. Some keyboard tracks in purple, and then lead vocal tracks in peach, I guess you would call that, and then some backing vocals in pink. So first of all, we'll recap some of the basics of Reaper. I know I went through that in the last video, but it never hurts to reinforce it. So you have the 2 windows here. The top window is sort of the main window or the sequence editor. And then this bottom window here is the mixer view. And so I can close the mixer down here. And then you just have the sequence editor. You can scroll through and see all the tracks that way. If I want to reopen the mixer, I can go to View, Mixer, I think it was Control M. So again, we have on the left here, you have the master track, which all of these individual instrument tracks are going to run into that and be outputted through the master track. So everything's summed at the master and then outputted there. So again, going through a few of the basics, on each individual track, you have a fader for the volume of that particular instrument, and then a pan knob, which will pan it to the right or the left of the stereo spectrum. Again, if I double click on that, that'll center it. Same with on the fader, double click, that goes back to 0. We have a record arm, disarm button. If I click on that, then that arms that track to be recorded on. And then right below that is a record monitoring button, so you can hear yourself when you're recording, which is always a good thing. And so below that we have a mute button, so that'll just mute that particular track. You'll still be able to hear everything else. Below that, there's a solo button, which mutes everything else except for that track. And then some routing stuff that we won't get into right now. So first of all, if you open yours up and it doesn't look quite like this, if you have a smaller screen, it might look something more like this, let's say. So if it does, then what you want to do is go ahead and look for that invisible line right underneath the time code here, and then just drag that up, and then you'll see these window sets here. So there's a couple, there's a top window set and then a bottom window set with these blocks here. In the top window set, these are all for plugins. And so the way that audio runs through each individual channel is that when you record audio onto the channel, it's going to run from the top down, right? So the audio will run through this first plugin and then into the second plugin, the third, the fourth. So it runs in series that way. Now the bottom window sets is for routing. So for routing this track to other tracks or out of a hardware piece of gear. So right now, let's take, for example, the snare drum is routed to what's called the drum crush, which is actually way over here. And so all the black tracks are for parallel processing, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper in a bit. So getting back to the snare drum, though, that's going to the drum crush, the drum distortion, drum verb, and then the drum bus. So the first three there are all these parallel processing tracks over here. And then the last one is what's called a bus. And so as you can see, there's a tom bus here, there's a drum bus, a bass bus. So each individual instrument set has its own bus. And so the way that works is that all of these individual drums are routed to the drum bus. So if I want to turn up or down the whole drum set, instead of having to turn down each individual track, I could just go to the drum bus and control the overall level that way. So hugely beneficial there. And so as you can see, the toms, because there's 4 separate tom drums, those are going to also have an individual tom bus to control those. And so the tom bus is actually routed to the drum bus. So you can route a bus track to another bus. And as you can see, for each instrument set, we have a bus. So there's bass tracks here that are bus to the bass bus, and then the acoustic guitar bus here, electric guitar bus is here, and then we have a keyboard bus here, lead vocal bus here, and then a backing vocal bus back here. So let's say if we go back to the drum set here. Now, if you're not familiar with the different elements of a drum kit, I would recommend that you do some research. But in our drum set here, we have a kick drum, a snare drum, 4 toms, as I mentioned earlier. And then on this side are all cymbals. So we have the hi-hat, the ride, and then 2 crash cymbals. So I think at this point, the best thing to do would be to jump into an example of how the drum set works. And so if you look over on this side at the light blue track here titled Drum MIDI, this is going to be the track that we're going to actually be dragging our MIDI drum grooves into. So you remember our folder that we dragged onto the desktop from earlier. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And as you can see, there's a subset of folders for different genres. And so let's say if I go open up metal, you have different types of grooves, slow, heavy, different feels. But let's say if we go to power rock. So on this one, we have different songs. And so if I just go to the first song there, you have different sections, for the chorus, the verse, bridge, intro, outro. Let's say I'll just take this bridge one here. So I'm going to drag that straight into Reaper and onto the drum MIDI track. And then let's see what that sounds like. So we'll play that here. All right. So what's happening there is that if I double click on the MIDI file, you can see in the piano roll all of the MIDI information. So each one of these keys triggers a separate drum. So on C2, I have my kick drum. On D2, there's a snare drum. You have the ride cymbal up here. So each of those is triggering a sampler on that channel. So let's say C2, the kick drum, that information is being sent to the sampler, which is in the first plugin slot here. So I actually recorded or sampled each individual drum and cymbal at different velocities, meaning soft, a little harder, little harder, little harder, little harder, and then loaded those into the sampler. And you can control that all in the MIDI file here. So let's say if I were to create from scratch a MIDI, what's called a MIDI item. So I can drag my selection here and then go up to Insert, New MIDI Item. And then I can double click on that. So let's say if I want to, remember our kick drum is on C2. There we go. And then what you do is just double click, and then I just entered a kick hit there. All right. Now, the best thing to do is to have it snap to the grid, and that's what this button here is for, the snap to grid button. Looks like a little magnet there. And then so now that'll snap straight to the grid there. So let's say if I put it here. Okay, so right now it's at the highest velocity, meaning it's the hardest hit. I can turn that down, a little softer, a little softer. All right, so another thing you can do too is you can set loop points. So if I, again, drag up here and form a selection there. So over here in the play region, I have a loop, or I think they're calling it toggle repeat, which R is a shortcut there. So if I press play, it'll just loop on, and then I can play with the velocity. So that's triggering different samples of that kick drum. Pretty cool. Okay, so getting back to the parallel processing. So let's say if I go back to my drum kit here, my MIDI drum groove, get rid of that. And then let's go ahead and loop that section. So again, I'm selecting a region there, and then I already have the loop function selected, and then I can just play it again. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the drum crush. So the drum crush is compression, and in a later tutorial, we'll get into what exactly compression is, but what I'll do for now is play the drum beat and then turn that up. So it just makes it a little bigger sounding, right? And then I can just solo that by itself. Okay, gives it a little bit of fatness. You can think of it that way. Okay, next up we have the drum distortion. So if I turn that up, that's exactly what it sounds like it is. Now really there I just have the kick drum and the snare drum and the tom drums going to that. So if you put the cymbals into that, kind of muddies it up. So typically you want to run the kick drum, the snare drum, and the toms to the drum distortion, and also the drum crush. So I might have a little bit of the cymbals going there. And so you can vary the amount of each of those routing sends over here. So in other words, let's say if I go to my ride cymbal, so I do have some of that going to the drum crush here. And so right here, I can turn that up or down, the amount I want getting sent there. Or if I click on the routing, then you can also adjust it here. Pretty cool. All right, you have some other options there that we'll get into later on. So we have drum distortion and then drum reverb. So that creates a little bit of ambiance there. If I solo that, not the greatest sounding reverb in the world, but later on we'll look at adding some better reverb plugins. All right, so let's try putting a little bit of that all together. So play that again, turn up drum crush, a little distortion, a little reverb. Kind of makes it, a little bigger sounding. Pretty cool.